I'm about to start my Mary Poppins build, and I'm doing so by being super lazy, and I folded 2 layers of my fabric so that when I cut out my quarter circle skirt pattern, I get 2 half circles so that makes a full circle, if that makes sense. And I realized doing this and cutting this without pins might make my circle a little warped, but my circle skirt pattern is also not perfect, and I kind of live by good enough is good enough. So I'm gonna cut it all out around this pattern. I made this pattern by measuring out 35 inches from the corner of a piece of wrapping paper to the bottom of the piece of wrapping paper, and I held my measuring tape and just measured out 35, 35, 35, 35 all the way around a right angle. And then I cut out the part for my waist by using a measurement that would be bigger than what I needed. So I measured out 6 inches, 6 inches, 6 inches, 6 inches, 6 inches, and made it into a curve. And that should give me just a little bit of ruffling at my waist, which will make the skirt even fuller. Okay, here we go. Voila, there are beads everywhere, but I have half of a circle. So now I'm gonna do that same exact thing with some white fabric, and then I'll have a skirt after I sew it together. Alright, so all I'm doing is layering one side of the fabric, beaded side to beaded side, along the side seam. I'm starting at where the waist is and going down because I prefer to trim off parts at the end if things don't meet up correctly, because I was lazy with when I cut out my pieces, but that's just me. I'm gonna go slow at points because sewing through the beads may break my needle, but that's fine because I can always just fix it. I prefer not to use pins unless I have to, so I'm just freehanding it. I always line up my fabric to where the end of this foot is, but that's because I find it works for me and not like what's correct. There are beads here, so I'm just gonna stop and just go slowly through it. And yeah, people like to ask me how I'm good at sewing, and the truth is I'm just not. That's my real secret. That's the secret. Now we're just gonna do the same deal with the regular white fabric. Again, just lining up nice side to nice side and putting it down and sewing along the edge. That's all it takes. Back stitch and go down. It's like really weird trying not to knock this camera over. I'm not used to this. This is weird. Look at that, it doesn't match up at the end. I don't know if you can see that because of the light, but it doesn't match up at the end, and that's totally fine because nobody's perfect, especially me. Backstitch, go to the other seam on the skirt and do the same deal, and then you're done. That's it. Easy peasy. So this is my cheat when I sew clothes. This is the same skirt that we worked on yesterday. Slash, you don't know that because all you can see is my fabric. But the seam that we made is going to hold the 2 pieces together, but I'm going to serge the sides, which finishes off the edge of the fabric. Because you can see here it's kind of fraying. So I'm just going to stick it through my serger and it will look much nicer and a lot more professional. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I also removed all of the beads out of the inside seams along the top edge and the bottom edge of this skirt. That way I don't have to worry about the beads hitting my needles like I stupidly worried about yesterday when I sewed the side seams of this skirt. Alright, let's put that away. And there you have it. That is a much nicer edge. And it'll look nicer on the inside of the garment. Alright, so other side. Do the same exact thing. And this is kind of my cheat for how I don't line clothes. I serge the sides once it's all made, which I know is not the right way you're supposed to serge seams, but that's how I do it, and it saves me time. When you're serging, because it does cut off the extra fabric on the sides, you just want to be careful not to have any of your fabric double over because it will cut through that. Which it shouldn't do if you're being careful, but you know, I like to be fast, I like to be quick, so sometimes it makes me cry. And there we have a nice finished edge of the whole skirt. And now none of the embroidery is going to fall out because it's all finished off on the bottom. I totally changed my mind, and I don't think I'm going to serge the bottom or even sew the bottoms together. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the tops together and then just hem the bottom skirt regularly because I'm not offended by this line of serge. And I feel like if I even like stitch it up, it's gonna look weird, so I'm just gonna leave it like this and it can just fall over the front skirt. I think that's what I'm gonna do, but I might also change my mind. So now all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna serge the bottom of the other skirt, and then I can serge the top together as a quick stitch. And then maybe I'll get to work on the top, but that might also be crazy talk. Okay, so I found my horsehair braid and it looks like I have enough of it. It is this really cool, like mildly stretchy material, and it's just gonna reinforce that hem. So for circle skirts, I really like to use it because it kind of gives it just a little more shape to the bottom of the skirt and makes it have just a little bit more stability. And I probably sew these on like super wrong, but like it works for me. And I don't really know how else I'm supposed to sew it. So I usually just line it up with the right side of the fabric facing up. And I use a long stitch. So for my sewing machine, I'm using just a regular straight stitch set at my longest width, which is 5. And I'm just going to sew all the way around the bottom of the skirt, overlap it a little bit where it first starts, and then I'm going to fold over the hem and just stitch it down with my regular length stitch and call it a day on the hem of this skirt. I think normally people would probably pin this on so it would be a ton easier, but like I find pins to be really annoying, so I just don't use them. This is where we started, so I'm just going to cut a little bit farther than when we started, and I'm going to overlap it because I like to be extra safe. And don't forget to backstitch because that's what's going to keep your stitches there. So I'm going to cut off all these loose threads, and I usually try to cut them pretty low because I hate when there's loose threads. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it down and then I'm going to fold it again so that it's entirely trapped between fabric, which is like a little bit of an overkill, but it's fine. And now I'm just going to set my stitch length back to my regular length. I might even go a little bit above my regular length. And I'm going to set my needle so it's a little bit more in the center because I tend to go rogue a lot, so it'll look better this way. And the best part is, since there is something sturdy in there, you can kind of just go with the flow because it's going to trap. And I don't use pins because it's kind of like there is a hard thing in there, so you can kind of just flip it under as you go around, if that makes sense. And I'm just gonna again line up my fabric with the edge of this and pray that it stays there, but it might not, but that's fine. Nobody's gonna see it. And right now I'm stuck in the ditch, so I'm just gonna move that along. And I'm gonna back stitch for one or two, and I'm gonna keep going. And this is how my hem is gonna turn out. I'm gonna actually do this one pretty slow because it's a hem, and you should probably go slow on a hem. I say that and then immediately step up my my pace. Okay, Kelsey, good job. And I hate everything because there was no more thread in the bobbin, which means I have to do most likely most of this again. Or no, just like 2 feet. That's obnoxious. Someone should really invent a machine that tells you when your bobbin is out. Like, hey idiot, change me, please. So we're just gonna start where the stitches ended, backstitch, and sew the rest of this hem because somebody decided to be cranky. Again, do your best to line up the stitches and then backstitch. I'm gonna help hand feed it because we're about to go over a seam, and it gets cranky when it does that. Okay, now we're gonna cut the threads and be done with this hem. And thus, ladies and gentlemen, we have a finished hem. Alright, now we're gonna connect these two pieces, and they're gonna be beautiful and lovely, and we're gonna use pins. I am just going to mark. We're doing right sides up, matching up the side seams of these skirts, if that makes sense, just because we are going to sew them together. So I'm going to put the seam over the seam, and I'm going to put a pin in it so that seam lines up perfectly. Now when we serge, we're going to make sure we take the pin out because this machine has a blade in it, and if you don't take the pin out, it's going to cut the blade and most likely break your needles. But it's the best way to make sure things stay in place. And now I'm just going to do the same thing, match the seam up to the seam, and put a pin in it. So I'm going to take my first pin out and I'm going to start with one side seam. And serging 2 layers together that are the same size is such an easy way to get a nice crisp edge and base stitch them together. If you're not comfortable with this, base stitching with a long stitch on a sewing machine and then serging will look just as good. remove the pin. All right, they're together. And look at that, it's so pretty. All right, here's my finished skirt. And I say finished as in like everything else is done except for the waistband, because I have not decided if I want to put in an elastic waistband and have this whole thing be like a top and a skirt, or if I want it to be a dress. I think I'll decide that later.